What if I told you that 20 years of sobriety does not make you immune to relapse, and that the very confidence built over decades can quietly become the blind spot that reopens old neural doors? Many people believe that once they have crossed the threshold of long-term recovery, especially after 40, the battle is over and the brain has reset to factory settings. But addiction does not operate like a temporary illness that disappears with time. It is a chronic, relapsing condition rooted in durable neurobiological adaptations. The human brain is an organ of learning, and addiction is a powerful teacher. Through repeated exposure to substances, dopamine pathways in the mesolimbic reward system are sensitized, glutamate circuits encode associative memories, and stress response systems become tightly interwoven with substance-related relief. Years of abstinence significantly strengthen executive function, emotional regulation, and resilience. Yet the original learning does not fully erase. It remains stored, much like a deeply engraved pathway in wet cement that hardened long ago. As Dr. Anna Lembke, a leading psychiatrist in addiction medicine, has emphasized in her work, the brain remembers the relief even when the conscious mind remembers the pain. That distinction is critical. After 40, life rarely becomes simpler. It becomes more complex. Career transitions may threaten identity. Physical health changes can alter sleep, energy, and mood. Children leave home. Marriages evolve or dissolve. Parents age or pass away. And financial pressures can intensify. These midlife transitions activate the very neural systems that addiction once soothed. The stress axis, the loneliness circuits, the uncertainty alarms. When cortisol rises and emotional discomfort increases, the brain instinctively scans its memory bank for solutions that once delivered fast relief. It does not ask whether that solution carried long-term destruction. It simply recalls that it worked. This is not moral failure. It is conditioned learning operating exactly as designed. Environmental cues can also resurface unexpectedly. A business trip to a city where drinking once felt celebratory. A social event where alcohol flows freely. A moment of private despair after a medical diagnosis. Each can function as a trigger, activating dormant neural ensembles that were wired years earlier. The individual may feel confused by the sudden intensity of craving, wondering why the thought appeared after so much stability. The answer lies in the durability of synaptic connections formed under high dopamine states. Addiction imprints deeply because it hijacks survival circuitry. The brain encodes substance use as if it were essential to well-being. Long-term sobriety builds new pathways of coping, community, and purpose. But those pathways coexist with the old ones rather than replacing them entirely. After 40, when life stress accumulates and biological resilience subtly shifts, the balance between these pathways can be challenged. Understanding this reality is not meant to instill fear. It is meant to instill vigilance. Recovery is not a finish line, but an ongoing adaptive process. The goal is not perfection or the elimination of vulnerability. The goal is awareness, an informed recognition that the brain's history travels with you, even decades later, and that wisdom lies in respecting its power rather than underestimating it. By midlife, the architecture of a person's identity has often been constructed around stability, responsibility, and accumulated wisdom. Yet beneath that structure, the neurobiology of addiction remains quietly preserved, waiting for sufficient stress to reactivate its circuitry. The vulnerability after 40 is rarely dramatic at first. It begins subtly, almost invisibly, through cognitive and emotional shifts that feel ordinary. Sleep becomes fragmented due to hormonal changes or medical conditions, and chronic sleep disruption lowers prefrontal cortical control, reducing impulse regulation. Career stagnation or unexpected job loss challenges self-worth, activating the anterior cingulate cortex and amygdala in ways that heighten threat perception. Grief from losing parents or close friends introduces existential anxiety, and the mind begins searching for rapid emotional modulation. In these moments, the brain's conditioned memory networks, strengthened long ago through dopamine surges paired with relief, can resurface through a process known as memory reconsolidation. Each time a craving-related memory is reactivated under stress, it becomes temporarily malleable and can grow stronger if paired with rumination or fantasy. This is where suspense quietly builds in the life of someone who believed they were safe. There may be no immediate substance use, only a nostalgic thought. It used to help me relax. It used to make social situations easier. It used to quiet the noise. That word "used to" is dangerous because it selectively edits history, recalling relief while minimizing consequence. The hippocampus retrieves the contextual memory of comfort, while the insula reawakens bodily sensations associated with past intoxication. Over time, these microactivations can accumulate, lowering the threshold for relapse. Midlife also introduces physiological changes that can amplify vulnerability. Metabolic shifts affect how substances are processed, meaning that if relapse occurs, the body may respond more intensely and dangerously than it did decades earlier. Tolerance patterns change, and overdose risk increases precisely because individuals may underestimate their altered biology. Social isolation can compound this risk. Children leaving home may create a quiet house that feels emptier than expected. Divorce can fracture long-standing routines and support systems. Even positive events, such as retirement or financial success, can disrupt structure, leaving unstructured time that invites rumination. Addiction thrives in isolation and idle mental space. The stress response system, particularly the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, becomes more reactive with cumulative life strain. Elevated cortisol not only increases anxiety, but also enhances the salience of previously learned reward cues. The brain does not differentiate between a lion in the savannah and an uncomfortable conversation about aging. It registers threat and seeks relief. This is the turning point where many people misinterpret vulnerability as personal weakness. In truth, it reflects the persistence of neural adaptations formed during active addiction. The suspense lies in how quietly this process unfolds. There is rarely a dramatic warning siren. Instead, there are small rationalizations, subtle emotional shifts, and a growing sense that something feels off. Recognizing these early signals, irritability, secrecy, romanticizing past use, disengagement from recovery communities, is essential. Long-term sobriety provides resilience, but it does not eliminate susceptibility. The brain remains a dynamic organ, shaped by both past learning and present stress. Midlife simply introduces a convergence of pressures that can tip the balance if awareness and intentional coping strategies are not actively maintained. The most powerful shift occurs when relapse is no longer viewed as a mysterious collapse of character, but as a predictable interaction between stress biology and conditioned learning, because that understanding transforms fear into strategy. When individuals over 40 recognize that their brains still contain sensitized dopamine pathways and deeply encoded associative memories, they can move from denial to deliberate prevention. The first pillar of a midlife relapse prevention framework is physiological stabilization, because the brain under chronic sleep deprivation, unmanaged pain, hormonal fluctuation, or untreated depression is far more vulnerable to craving activation. Protecting sleep, engaging in regular physical movement, and addressing medical issues are not peripheral wellness habits. They are direct interventions on the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and long-term decision-making. The second pillar is stress inoculation through structured coping systems. Chronic stress amplifies glutamatergic signaling in reward circuits, increasing cue reactivity, so deliberate stress reduction practices such as mindfulness training, cognitive behavioral strategies, breath regulation, and community engagement recalibrate the nervous system before it reaches a tipping point. The third pillar is environmental design. The brain is exquisitely responsive to cues, so minimizing exposure to high-risk environments, maintaining recovery-oriented social networks, and creating daily routines that reduce idle rumination act as protective scaffolding. Long-term sobriety must be actively maintained rather than assumed. There is also profound power in cognitive transparency. When nostalgic thoughts arise, naming them as conditioned memories rather than authentic desires weakens their influence. Craving loses intensity when it is observed as a transient neurochemical event rather than obeyed as a command. This metacognitive awareness strengthens the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and restores agency. Midlife can also become a period of existential re-evaluation, and without intentional purpose, the void can invite regression. Therefore, cultivating meaning through mentorship, creative pursuits, service, or spiritual practice provides alternative dopamine sources rooted in mastery and contribution rather than intoxication. Suspense often resolves at the moment a person decides whether to conceal vulnerability or expose it to trusted support. Silence feeds relapse. Accountability disrupts it. Re-engaging with therapy, peer groups, or structured recovery programs at the first sign of emotional drift is not regression. It is strategic maintenance of a chronic condition. The brain changes with experience across the lifespan, and neuroplasticity remains active well into later adulthood. Each healthy coping decision reinforces adaptive circuits and weakens maladaptive ones through competitive synaptic remodeling. Relapse risk after 40 is real, but so is the capacity for renewed strength. The narrative shifts from helplessness to stewardship of one's biology, environment, and emotional life. Long-term sobriety is not fragile, it is dynamic. It requires humility, vigilance, and proactive design. When vulnerability is understood through a neurobiological lens, individuals stop relying solely on willpower and begin building systems that align with how the brain truly functions. That is empowerment rooted in science rather than shame. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.